The Subcommittee on Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Communications will come to order. The Subcommittee is meeting today to receive testimony on the effectiveness of the Science and Technology Directorate at the Department of Homeland Security. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. I want to welcome our witnesses here today to discuss an issue that is important to our Homeland Security, the role of the Science and Technology Directorate within the Department of Homeland Security and the Homeland Security Enterprise. Science and technology by law is the primary research and development arm of the department. However, it seems that over 15 years since its creation, science and technology is still struggling to fulfill its role within DHS and the Homeland Security Enterprise. Given the evolving threat we face from terrorist attacks, from last week's attack in New York City to powerful hurricanes and expansive wildfires, we need to ensure that there is a component or office at the department looking for both the short-term and long-term innovative solutions to address the challenges the nation currently faces. By design, this should be science and technology. However, budget constraints and the changes to R&D priorities have restricted science and technology's abilities to meet its mission. The committee has heard concerns about the lack of coordination between science and technology and other DHS components and offices on R&D. Additionally, in the past, it was unclear how science and technology prioritizes its R&D. In 2015, DHS reinstituted the Integrated Product Teams process. These teams, comprised of a cross-section of DHS components and offices, identify capability gaps which direct science and technology research and development priorities. This is a step in the right direction, but more still needs to be done. I am troubled that science and technology has repeatedly changed its focus, both on whether to focus on short-term technology or long-term research on larger unknown threats, and whether to deal only with DHS components or external stakeholders. This back and forth needs to stop, and there needs to be a candid conversation on what science and technology's mission should be. I hope this hearing is just the start of these conversations. Moving forward, this subcommittee is committed to working with all relevant stakeholders as we consider the appropriate mission and structure of science and technology. While science and technology has faced constant challenges and obstacles, there are some science and technology programs that have made a positive impact on the Homeland Security Enterprise. The National Urban Security Technology Lab, also known as NewSteel, in New York City serves as a federal resource for first responders by supporting the development and testing and evaluation of new technology. I have had the opportunity to visit NewSteel and have seen firsthand the remarkable resources NewSteel provides for our first responders. I was very concerned that the President's fiscal year 2018 budget request proposed its closure, in addition to the closure of 2 other DHS labs that focus on chemical and biological threats. Now is not the time to be cutting federal resources to counter chemical and biological threats and support for our first responders. I'm pleased that the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Delaney, and I were able to successfully restore funding for these 3 vital labs during the appropriations process on the floor. I'm looking forward to hearing from our witnesses on the current state of science and technology and its programs and what more needs to be done to ensure that science and technology is an effective and efficient partner with first responders, academia, and industry, as well as DHS components and offices. I look forward to our discussion. The Chair now recognizes my friend, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, for an opening statement that he may have.
Good morning. I want to thank the Chairman for holding the Subcommittee on Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Communications first hearing to review the activities of the Science and Technology Directorate. I look forward to working with SNT and its stakeholders to ensure that components of the department and their state and local partners have the technology they need to do the jobs better and safer. I would like to begin, however, by addressing a few matters not directly related to today's hearing. First, I'd like to send my sympathies to those affected by the horrific terrorist attack in New York City on Halloween and express my gratitude to the brave firefighters, EMS, and law enforcement personnel who responded. I would also like to join the people of Sutherland Springs, Texas, in mourning the 26 people murdered for being at the wrong place at the wrong time, in this case, at church on Sunday. To those grieving loved ones, we pray for your strength in the difficult days that are to come. And to those fed up with members of Congress sending their thoughts and prayers to victims of mass shootings every time it happens and then refusing to do anything to stop it, I stand with you as well. Instead of letting senseless actions take place, it's long overdue that we do what makes the most sense to significantly change or to stop this from ever happening again. Finally, I would like to express my disappointment that last week's full committee hearing with the FEMA administrator and the mayor, San Juan, was postponed, and join full committee ranking member Thompson in asking that it be rescheduled as soon as possible. As I said at our last hearing, our national response doctrine is not working for the people of Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, and we need to figure out what we can do to expedite the response and recovery efforts there. They are American citizens as well. I've heard firsthand from citizens attempting to get goods to struggling family members back in Puerto Rico and finding unsurmountable financial obstacles at every single turn. We must do better, and not tomorrow, right now. Returning to the subject of today's hearing, one thing that these recent tragedies have taught us is that the threats we face, from natural disasters to man-made attacks, are continuing to evolve. From extreme weather events becoming more frequent and more severe, to terrorists weaponizing cars and trucks, to bad actors wreaking havoc on soft targets, the kind of threats facing our country demands a science and technology doctorate that is sufficiently innovative and dynamic to be responsive to the demands of the ever-changing threat landscape. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today, particularly Dr. Reggie Brothers, the former Undersecretary of Science and Technology. During the 3 years he spent leading SNT, Dr. Brothers focused on cultivating relationships with the Homeland Security industrial base to better leverage off-the-shelf technologies, coordinating research, development priorities across the department, and launching programs to attract business to work with SNT by streamlining bureaucratic processes. Dr. Brothers navigated tight budgets and organizational challenges within DHS to create incentives for private sector engagement, and did so while working to overcome long-held industry concerns. The SNT did not have the budget or clout within the department to guarantee a market for Homeland Security solutions. Although SNT matured under Dr. Brothers' leadership, it continues to face budget challenges, struggles to gain the confidence of the private sector partners, and is involved in large DHS reorganizations of certain chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear counterterrorism activities. Now that Dr. Brothers is a free agent, no longer bound by OMB, I will be interested in his candid observations on these issues and how the committee can help bolster SNT credibility as the research and development hub that drives acquisition decisions in the department. With that, I look forward to the witnesses' testimony, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. I thank him for his statement. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a very distinguished panel before us today on this important topic, and I assure you all that your testimony is very important to us. This subcommittee has used testimony in every hearing that we've conducted in the last 2.5 years to come up with some results. So your efforts here today will be taken into consideration, and a product will be developed from them. Chief Timothy Rice serves as the Weapons of Mass Destruction Branch Coordinator for the New York City Fire Department. He currently serves as New York City's Radiological Response and Recovery Committee and New York City BioWatch Stakeholders Working Group. Dr. Gerald Parker, Jr. is the Associate Dean for Global One Health at the College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences and Campus Director for Global One Health at Texas A&M University. Dr. Parker also serves on several advisory boards, including the Homeland Security Science and Technology Advisory Committee and Biodefense Blue Ribbon Panel. Mr. Jacob Parker is the Director of Government Relations for the Security Industries Association and leads the development of the association's legislative and regulatory programs. Before coming to SIA, Mr. Parker served for more than a decade on Capitol Hill, covering Homeland Security, defense, foreign policy, and other issues. Dr. Reginald Brothers served as the Undersecretary for Science and Technology from April of 2014 to January of 2017. Prior to leading SNT, Dr. Brothers served in the U.S. Department of Defense's Office of the Assistant Secretary for Defense for Research and Engineering as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Research. In this position, he was responsible for policy and oversight of the Department's science and technology programs from basic research through the advanced technology development. The witnesses' full statements will appear on the record, and the Chair now recognizes Chief Rice for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Payne, and members of the Subcommittee on Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Communications. My name is Battalion Chief Timothy Rice, and I'm the Weapons of Mass Destruction Branch Coordinator for the New York City Fire Department. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the relationship between the FDNY and the Department of Homeland Security's Science and Technology Directorate. In May of 2001, FDNY's Chief of Hazardous Materials Operations, Jack Fanning, appeared and testified before Congress on the topic of government capabilities against terrorism. Chief Fanning was one of the firefighters who responded to the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. Beginning with that attack, the role of the fire service began to shift into the area of disaster preparedness and responding to acts of terrorism. In his testimony, Chief Fanning described this shift, and he detailed some of the plans and coordination that the FDNY and federal partners were undertaking as a result. He made it clear that those efforts were the tip of the iceberg and that much work remained to be done. I have seen the value of S&T in my own career. As a young firefighter in Washington Heights, I remember our fires had a radiation survey meter. It was kept in the office under the captain's bunk, and we were not sure quite how to use it. However, today, we have radiation equipment on every apparatus, and every firefighter carries not just the equipment, but the competency to employ it. As the range of threats against New Yorkers has grown and the risk of terror incidents broadens, the Department continues to adapt. We confront a wide variety of challenges beyond the traditional view of firefighters running into burning buildings. As Chief Fanning put it in 2001, at mass casualty incidents, no matter the scale, firefighters and other first responders will be there within minutes, and they'll do what they have always done, act to protect the public they serve. Knowing this, he urged Congress, let's provide them with the tools they need to perform their duties safely and effectively. 4 months after delivering that testimony, Chief Fanning made the ultimate sacrifice at the World Trade Center. However, his tremendous legacy endures, as does the point that he made during that congressional hearing. Members of the FDNY, NYPD, Emergency Management, and all first responder agencies are going to show up and protect the public. And we're tremendously appreciative of the ways in which our federal partners, such as our colleagues at S&T, provide us with the tools to perform our duty safely and effectively. For more than 15 years, the National Urban Science and Technology Laboratory, NewSteel, in New York City, has been a valuable resource to the FDNY. NewSteel is our conduit to S&T, and it helps the FDNY develop capabilities necessary to provide the highest levels of security for the New York-UASI region. The scientific data, equipment testing, training, and support provided by NewSteel assist the FDNY in navigating the thousands of products, equipment, technology, and reports that we would otherwise be left to evaluate on our own. We have invested heavily in all hazards and chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear preparedness in units throughout the department, including hazmat and marine resources. In addition to our partnerships, I must also highlight the critical importance of Homeland Security grants, particularly UASI, in facilitating the FDNY's ability to make many of these investments. We pride ourselves on being good stewards of those programs, and with the support of SNT, have been very successful. NewSteel also helps to enhance the fire department's capabilities to prepare for, respond to, and mitigate potential radiological and nuclear threats. Incidents around the world like Guyana, Chernobyl, and Fukushima have all shown that radioactive contamination will lead to widespread public panic. By working together with our partners at SNT and the scientific community, we have been able to operationalize procedures such as the deployment of community reception centers, which will enable us to rapidly screen nearly 1 million people or more who may fear contamination. We've also provided input into an SNT operational guide titled RDD Guidance for the First 100 Minutes. The knowledge we have gained and the plans we have developed inform first responder agencies across the nation. New York City agencies have broad outreach, and it is through these avenues that we disseminate what we've learned, gain valuable feedback, and consistently work to improve preparedness. The NewSteel Labs location in Lower Manhattan enables fire department personnel to access it with regularity. Our members attend monthly meetings for first responders and periodic forums such as the New York Area Science and Technology Forum. NewSteel personnel also travel to fire department facilities across the city and provide critical on-site guidance and evaluation. Homeland security is an immense challenge, and the New York City Fire Department is in a constant state of assessing and improving our resources to meet that challenge. Through our frequent and valuable interactions with NewSteel, the FDNY has greatly benefited from our partnership with S&T. The advantages of this relationship, both tangible and intangible, strengthen the department's ability to save life and property and ultimately make the people of New York and millions of visitors to the region safer each day. I thank you for your invitation to share our experience with the Science and Technology Directorate, and that's the end of my statement, sir.
Thank you, Chief Rice. The Chair now recognizes Dr. Parker for 5 minutes.
Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Payne, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I'm honored to appear before you today to provide my perspectives on the Department of Homeland Security's Science and Technology Directorate. The complexity and changing nature of the threats we face today, from terrorism to pandemics, are confounded by the complexity of our nation's vast Homeland Security enterprise that extends far beyond the Department of Homeland Security. The S&T Directorate has a critical role in helping unlock our nation's creative imagination and innovative spirit, which is vital to defending against the known and unknown threats to Homeland Security. I believe our nation's universities must be strong partners with S&T in this effort, either through the Centers of Excellence programs or other programs. The S&T Directorate has made great strides since its founding, and particularly more recently under the leadership of my panel colleague, Dr. Brothers. Dr. Brothers applied sound leadership principles that effectively brought focus to the department's evolving near and longer-term needs. He also placed priority on the employee morale that improved the command culture of the Directorate. Although the S&T Directorate is in better shape than ever, continued evolution is essential as the threats and challenges will evolve too. But harnessing the broader interagency Homeland Security science and technology enterprise, particularly for biodefense, is also an important policy question. What is the role of the S&T Directorate? To serve only the DHS components? Or to help drive the broader interagency research enterprise, to include funding shared Homeland Security gaps that may be a primary purview of another federal agency? Examples include defense against animal agriculture from bioterror attacks and biological attribution. I believe DHS S&T interagency leadership is essential. As originally envisioned, the S&T Directorate should have assumed a larger biodefense leadership role through biological risk assessments. But a link between risk assessments to interagency Homeland Security priorities and appropriations remains elusive. It is now clear this will require White House leadership coupled to a new national strategy as recommended by the Biodefense Blue Ribbon Panel. The administration's pending biodefense strategy and decision on leadership may result in a renewed interest and a need to reboot the DHS S&T risk assessments and play a larger interagency role. A near-term concern, the President's 2018 budget request proposed to eliminate agricultural and animal-specific Homeland Security research by the S&T Directorate, and has recommended closure of the National Biodefense and Analysis Countermeasure Center, or NBAC, to provide savings for other priorities. DHS, with substantial contributions from the state of Kansas, will spend well over $1 billion to construct the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility, or NBAF. The Homeland Security research needs of NBAF have been documented. However, NBAF will not reach its potential without federal funding for the critical research its planners envisioned. That included USDA and DHS S&T research programs. Recommended closure of the NBAC also raises questions about the NBAF that is still under construction. Does the same fate await the NBAF? These examples signal diminished DHS and executive branch support for agricultural biosecurity research specifically and biodefense in general at a time that we should elevate this issue, not push it off until the next outbreak or bioterror attack when it will be too late. The recent Ebola and avian flu outbreaks demonstrate this threat. Beyond biodefense, these two Homeland Security examples, the need for interagency leadership and adequate funding support, may be symptomatic of a larger policy issue for the S&T Directorate. Is the S&T Directorate saddled with legacy laboratory infrastructure that does not fit the DHS internal priorities today, even if these assets are important to the broader enterprise? It may be better policy to transfer to the appropriate lead federal agency to own, operate, and maintain critical laboratory infrastructure, such as the NBAC, or other laboratories, rather than propose closure or maintain the status quo within DHS S&T. It's a policy question. There are many issues to consider in such a policy option were pursued, but the end result may be better stewardship of critical laboratory assets needed for the broader Homeland Security enterprise. It may also allow the S&T Directorate to focus on a research and innovation portfolio that can more easily flex to changing needs over time and better engage university scientists. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I will be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Parker. The chair now recognizes Mr. Parker for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Payne, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I'm Jake Parker, Director of Government Relations for the Security Industry Association, which represents nearly 800 companies that provide security technology solutions. Thanks for the opportunity to speak about the important partnership between DHS S&T and its stakeholders in the private sector. The input I'm providing here is based broadly on the experiences and perspectives that SIA member companies have shared with me, including both small and large businesses. I've tried to summarize these for you and provide an unfiltered way as possible. Technology provided by our industry plays a key role in DHS component operations and protecting critical infrastructure. Since November, this month, is Critical Infrastructure Security and Resilience Month, I first wanted to highlight S&T's work through the Support Anti-Terrorism by Fostering Effective Technologies Act, known as the SAFETY Act. This is the most common interface between our member companies and S&T. As you know, the SAFETY Act was passed in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks to establish a way to encourage the development and deployment of security technologies to protect critical infrastructure. And the vast majority of that infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector. It provides liability protections for certified suppliers and end users against claims arising from terrorist attacks. which this has been identified as a major obstacle to the deployment of the effective security measures at that time. Not only does the Safety Act provide liability protections, but the designation and certification provides assurances that a product or system meets high standards of safety and effectiveness and that it works as intended. Our industry provides manufactured products as well as systems integration services and even software such as cybersecurity programs. All of these are potentially eligible, but more recently, owners and operators of facilities such as sports stadiums are making use of the Safety Act designation for their entire system of security measures as a comprehensive program, and in this, our security technology plays a key role as well. So over the past year, we understand that 91 applications were approved by the Safety Act Office out of 133 submitted, taking an average of nearly 4 months to get through the process. And this has a significant jobs and economic impact. The office projected that the approval of these technologies will support 87,000 jobs and greatly increase local business revenue. So we believe that Congress should work to ensure this important program continues to be successful and is provided with the resources necessary to meet the demand. Specifically, we believe that Congress should provide the Safety Act Office with a line item appropriation. This will provide budgetary certainty and program continuity, as well as help measure the return on investment. On the broader array of S&T programs, we're encouraged with the recent signs the Directorate is strengthening its efforts to coordinate research across the DHS components and industry stakeholders. 2 years ago, when Dr. Brothers, who we're honored to have with us here today, was serving as Undersecretary, the integrated product teams were reestablished to track and harmonize department-wide research and development efforts, which the Chairman highlighted was a step in the right direction, which we agree with. The most recent IPT report is only the second since this data has begun to be gathered, and a new process has been implemented for involving the operational components in identifying the gaps where S&T efforts will be the most effective. According to this most recent report, IPTs are intended to sustain a year-round process in which a specific component is designated to shepherd the process for each gap that's identified from the point it's identified to the transition to solutions that close it. We think this is really encouraging because in the view of our member companies, the business case for involvement in S&T programs would be much stronger if each effort was championed by a DHS operational component that is involved at some level from the beginning of the process and committed to making use of the technologies explored. This may result from the fact that there's a perception out there that the S&T programs only infrequently impact the operational procurement activities of DHS components in a significant way. More involvement from the components up front could help improve this perception, as well as efforts to increase industry awareness of these new initiatives by S&T, which are more focused. So in October, S&T released a new industry guide, which I think does a great job of providing industry with the roadmap to each of the ways they can participate, and summarizes the Directorate's current and future needs. We understand this is the first step towards providing a centralized online interface for industry. Members also tell us that for many smaller companies, responding to the call for proposals needs to be aligned with something they are already doing in order to help justify the use of resources to apply. This is especially true if they're responding to grant proposals and other research opportunities is not a normal and significant part of a technology company's business model. Whether large or small, though, companies tell us that it would benefit them greatly if the process of working with S&T was easier and less bureaucratic. We were optimistic about plans to update and improve S&T's long-range broad agency announcements process, which is the standing request to the private sector to develop needed technology, and it's available for funding over a multi-year period. We understand that early next year, S&T is planning to make significant changes to this process based on industry feedback as it is retooled for 2019 and beyond. This includes a more direct linkage to component needs, administrative simplification, shortened review times, and clarification of a streamlined application process, and involvement from program managers prior to submission to make sure that there is the highest quality. When it comes to the S&T research and investment outlook for the next 4 years, the security industry is poised to contribute significantly, particularly when it comes to areas like biometrics collection and utilization, robotics and autonomous systems, enhanced situational awareness, identity credentialing and access management, automated vetting, and other technologies. We applaud S&T's goals outlined in its 2017 innovation strategy to ensure the industry is fully engaged in meeting the demands of the Homeland Security enterprise, and that the end users of Homeland Security technology in both the public and private sectors have access to the best available products. So we're committed to doing our part as an association to help engage industry with this effort, and look forward to answering any questions you may have. I'll do my best, but if I can't, I will definitely go back to our members and provide you an answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. The chair now recognizes Dr. Brothers for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Donovan and Ranking Member Payne and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today on the role and effectiveness of the Department of Homeland Security's Science and Technology Directorate. We're now living in a post-industrial age with a globally interconnected web leading to a highly integrated world with supply chains that reach thousands of miles. Things that were previously done only by nation states are now accomplished by sub-state actors, gangs, groups, and even individuals. Our new reality is an asymmetric threat environment where individuals attack government institutions and nation states attack civilian infrastructure with little fear of retaliation or even attribution. In the past, we discussed precision targeting of kinetic weapons. We're now discussing precision targeting of individuals and content on Facebook. And technology continues to accelerate with artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, commercial drones, synthetic biology, and quantum computing, all promising tremendous benefits to society, but also the potential to create complex and vulnerable threat surfaces. This global threat context informs us that the nation needs a sufficiently and consistently funded, agile, adaptive, and relevant, and rapid innovation engine to confront the current and future threats to our national security. DHS S&T has worked hard to focus on being highly relevant, shifting from the past focus on long-term basic research to near-term operational impact. S&T can now be an important asset for the Secretary as one of the few cross-departmental entities. S&T created a laboratory as a department-wide resource for leading-edge data analytic and machine learning software, where operational personnel work with S&T staff to evaluate and co-develop mission-centric solutions. This capability resulted in a tool using advanced facial recognition that identified 475 child sex victims, leading to their rescue from abusers. In partnership with the New York Police Department and Metropolitan Transportation Authority, S&T installed a permanent test bed in New York City's Grand Central Terminal, an extension of our pilot demonstrations that successfully measured and mapped how and where a bioagent would be transported in the event of a terrorist attack in the subway system. S&T completed a Tucson border security operational exercise for Customs and Border Protection and ICE to evaluate border security technology capabilities, linking Border Patrol, HIS, and industry. S&T also provided support to the response and recovery efforts from Hurricanes Irma and Harvey with training, decision support software, and communications equipment. Starting in December 2015, S&T initiated the Silicon Valley Innovation Program as an effort to engage creative technologists from across the world in solving pressing problems in national security. As of the present time, an awareness has been built with more than 1,000 startups, accelerators, and venture capitalists. 6 topic calls have been published, ranging from Internet of Things security to airport passenger processing. Applications have been received from across the country and from the international community. To date, there have been 9 Phase 1 awards and 4 Phase 2 awards, with the average time to award being only 45 days. For operational relevance, collaboration with users and industry is essential. The Cybersecurity Division has developed specific and relevant industry collaborations with the energy, financial, and automotive sectors. With the initiatives discussed above, S&T is demonstrating that it is working towards being the agile, adaptive, and rapid innovation engine I described. That said, there is a second context to consider when evaluating the potential of S&T to be effective. That second context is funding. If the FY18 budget cuts were to remain in effect, there will be severe impacts to the ability of DHS&T to do its job. For example, these budget cuts will reduce the funding of the Cybersecurity Division by 20% and the Chemical Biological Division by approximately 60%. Cybersecurity is a challenge that is exponentially increasing with time. Observed malware has increased 40 times in the past 10 years. Observed attacks on critical infrastructure have increased 1.5 times in just the past 3 years. With the emergence of the Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles, and other network innovations, the threat surfaces of our national security are rapidly expanding. While awareness of the need for cybersecurity is increasing, the same is not necessarily true for chemical and biological security. Threats from chemical and biological threat agents, known and yet unknown synthetic variations, are real and becoming more attractive to terrorist organizations. The National Biodefense Analysis and Countermeasures Centers, NBAC, and Chemical Security Analysis Center, CSAC, are recognized within the U.S. as the nation's focal points for biological and chemical defense awareness and response. But the funding for these centers is threatened to be cut due to the FY18 budget pressures, as well as the National Urban Security Technology Laboratory. Given the threats to national security that our current global context mandates, I am very concerned about the impact of these potential budget cuts. From my personal experience, I know that one of the most disruptive forces for a technologist and innovation organization is uncertain and unstable funding. This challenge is magnified DHS because the threat environment can change on a frequent basis, which can call for rapid change of investment across the R&D portfolio to meet an immediate or near-term threat. However, while I am concerned, I also believe with the appropriate support of the Department and Congress, S&T can meet the challenges of the 21st century. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Brothers. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. We have a unique opportunity here. We have representatives from first responders, academia, industry, and the insight from Dr. Brothers of having served in that agency for 3 years. I would just like to ask the panel if you could share with us, if there's one thing you would like to see going forward from S&D. You certainly deal with it on a daily basis. You study it. Industry creates it. Doctor, you've seen it in use. What would you like to see this agency do? What would you like to see this committee do? What would you like to see Congress do? Aside from funding, what direction would you like to see? What is needed for our country's security from S&D that, if you had the ability, what one thing or two things would you like to see from each of your perspectives? Chief?
Thank you. I would say just from my personal experience in working on rad nuke projects and planning issues around the region, I think in the chemical sector and the bio sector, a lot of the technology and data integration that we've seen with rad nuke, there's a lot of discussions about it, a lot of the conferences that we go to, a lot of the meetings we attend, and I would like to see the same amount of effort that we've seen in that rad nuke integration of technology apply to the chem and bio world. It seems that reach back capability, common operating picture, visuals for incident commanders, it's been breaking over the last couple of years for the rad nuke forum, but when it comes to chem bio, there is still some disconnect between the first responders and what command or emergency management might be seeing in the back. So I would like to see a greater effort in that regard to bring those other threats up onto the same level that the rad nuke preparedness is.
Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Parker?
Well, I first maybe echo my colleague that many of these, I would call it common operating picture type things, were actually called out in HSPD 9 and HSPD 10 quite some time ago. So that is something else that remains elusive, and it really should not continue to remain elusive. I think one thing, though, that I think S&T ought to be positioned so it can be a real driver of innovation, and it needs to be unencumbered, and unfortunately funding is part of that, and Dr. Brother said it best, it's the budget uncertainty that's so disruptive. But it really needs to focus on a DARPA-esque research and innovation that can really attract the best and brightest minds across the country, whether that's in universities, whether that's in the private sector, and it's got to be nimble and agile. And I did make a comment about laboratory infrastructure in my opening remarks. Now, laboratory infrastructure like the MBAC, MBAC and the other laboratory, they're all necessary for the Homeland Security enterprise. But I think one question is, are they best placed in DHS, where there may be threats of closure, or are they best placed in their lead federal agency for that may have responsibility, say, for animal health or attribution, the FBI or DOD command authorities? Those are policy questions, but S&T must be really agile and innovative and drive cutting-edge solutions that this is impossible to do to meet near-term and longer-term needs, but we got to be thinking about the unknown threats of the future.
Thank you, Doctor. Mr. Parker?
I guess from our perspective, you know, in our industry, the security industry, we see a lot of innovation happening in the private sector for the commercial market, and I think that's the pace of that is such that a focus on operationalizing some of these advances and innovations for government missions would be really high value activity, and a focus on that. If you look at the R&D outlook, many of those that SNT has put forward, a lot of those technology areas have seen really swift advances in the last year or two. And I think that, you know, often, you know, the government mission requires something different in a mission for first responders. It requires something slightly different, but it can be adapted for those uses, so.
Thank you, sir. Doctor?
Sure. I appreciate the question. I really do appreciate the question. I think, Ranking Member, you asked a question about you know, some of my thoughts since having been served as the Undersecretary. Here's one of the big things I ran into. So SNT has to obviously report, I'm sorry, I was not close enough? How's that? Better? Great. What I was saying is that SNT has to report very specifically in terms of the kinds of spends it does across the portfolio. Dr. Parker mentioned a good point, that we need kind of a DARPA-esque kind of agility. One of the challenges, having served at DARPA and DOD, is that with the way S&T has to report early commitments and obligations of funding, it makes it difficult when things happen. So let me give an example. When I was there, we had, if you probably remember, the drone landed on the White House lawn. So all of a sudden, there's concern. And also, I've got a portfolio where all my funding has been reported where I'm spending all this money. But now I've got to respond to an emerging threat. How do I do that? So the agility that Dr. Parker is talking about, and I applaud, I don't have the tools to make that happen. So I can't move money like that, even though there's an observed threat. So I think one of the things that we need help with is how do we, understanding your role as assuring oversight and the effective and efficient use of funding, how do we also give S&T the ability to be agile with this funding? When we have these emergent threats that we didn't necessarily predict, the so-called black swan events happen, how do we handle that? It's an issue. I think more specifically, we've done a good job, S&T has done a good job of reaching out to industry through the Silicon Valley program, for example. One of the tools for doing that, the investment vehicle, is called an Other Transactions Authority, other transactions. This has come up a number of times. I think S&T does need the authority for that, as opposed to going through management. So I think that's something that S&T could definitely use as well. Something that's more inside the department but could be encouraged is better integration into the acquisition process itself. Because I think you're probably familiar that with all S&T organizations, whether you're talking about DARPA or the DoD laboratories or S&T itself, fundamental challenge is what? It's the valley of death, as people call it, right? That valley of death is when you've come up with a research prototype. And that prototype has a lot of the capabilities you need, but it's not manufacturable at that point. How do you get that prototype, that concept, into the actual acquisition process? That's a challenge all research organizations has. But I think it would be encouragement to actually better integrate that into the department's way of thinking, the Joint Requirements Council, for example, which is part of the way the department's moving towards some of the more process-oriented ways of doing requirements that the Department of Defense has. How do you integrate these systems better? You mentioned the IPT process. And the IPT process, I think, is an important process. And it is, for the first time, really tried to give S&T an opportunity to focus on agreed-upon department capability priorities. There are challenges there, though, right? The challenges there are that that's a year-long process. So that means that you don't really start working on those until the next year. So, again, you have a delay. So how do we get more speed in this innovative process? That's a start. But we need to be able to handle these type, like I said, these emergent technologies, the emergent threats in a much more rapid basis. So I think those are some of the areas I'd encourage you to look at.
Well, I thank you all for your insight. My time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, the ranking member, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Brothers, as you know, the Science and Technology Doctorate is still operating without a permanent undersecretary. How important is that S&T have a strong leadership and clear direction in place as it carries out its mission?
Sure, thanks for the question. I think it's very important. And the reason why I say that is even though there's fully capable leadership from career as well as acting under secretary currently, typically what you find happens is that changes don't happen because everyone's waiting for the political appointee to actually come on board. Until that happens, you know, not a lot changes. And I think one of the challenges we have is I think many of the panelists here have agreed, we have a very fluid threat environment. And we have to be ready to adapt to this. And without strong leadership on top, that's not really possible right now. So even though I think we've made good changes, I think we need leadership that's going to be able to keep up with the change that we're seeing in our threat environment.
Let's see, Mr. Parker, would you like to weigh in on that?
Absolutely. I think that's, I would definitely agree with Dr. Brothers that, you know, there's definitely been, you know, the folks we worked with SNT, I think many of them are new in their positions in the last couple months. They have some great ideas about what they want to do, but they need, you know, leadership from the top to give them the green light to proceed. And so that's, I think, what Dr. Brothers was getting at.
Dr. Parker?
I totally agree. And there's outstanding professionals there in the department. They're keeping things moving. But it's the uncertainty, and who it's going to be, when are they going to come in, and they're ready to roll up their sleeves and work very hard. But it's the uncertainty it's really, I think, an issue.
And possibly go in a totally different direction than they've been.
Well, you know, I don't know that, but I think it's really more the uncertainty. I think Dr. Brothers did a whole lot to steady the ship, so to speak, in S&T. The command culture is greatly improved, and people are happy to come to work, and they're working hard, and you don't want to lose that momentum. And we have threats that we face every day, and we can't wait.
Chief Rice?
Thank you. Yes, I would have to agree with my colleagues here that leadership needs to be there and it needs to be strong. On a personal level and our interactions with the folks down at New Steel, it came as quite a shock that you know, they may have been on the cut side of this, but you know, they rolled up their sleeves and they continue to work on their portfolios and continue to contribute and make positive impacts for us on the responder side. So having that leadership in place so that they can reaffirm their mission and continue this work going forward is critical.
Okay. Dr. Brothers, when you first were named Undersecretary of Science and Technology, you told me that one of your priorities was to energize the Homeland Security industrial base. What are some of the challenges you experienced trying to attract businesses to participate in the Homeland Security industrial base?
You know, one of the biggest challenges, and Mr. Parker brought this up with the new outreach to industry that you were mentioning, it's communication. Right? I think one of the biggest challenges is that industry would, of course, like to solve these challenges. They don't necessarily know what those challenges are. They don't necessarily know who to talk to within the department, who to email. They don't necessarily know what the funding looks like. And I think that's still an issue. It's not just unique to DHS S&T, but I think one of the biggest challenges I've had was actually communicating what are our needs, who do you talk to, and what kind of funding is out there.
Okay. Let's see. As you know, the President's FY 2018 budget submission was criticized for its massive cuts to the Science and Technology Doctorate budget. What message did the budget send to the stakeholder community about the administration's commitment to research and development at S&T?
Well, I mean, the way I take that is that it's much lower priority. And I think, as I mentioned in my opening statement, my concern is when we're in an environment where the threats are increasing, that I think is the wrong message. I think we need to be messaging that we see this research and development, working with industry, as essential for our defense. And I don't think that's the message that the budget shows.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Parker?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the message would be uncertainty about the future, and that's very concerning. And obviously, there's other things in that submission too, relating to DHS, particularly FEMA grants, that we'd be very concerned with as well. But uncertainty would be the message that I would send.
Dr. Parker?
Yes, there's no doubt that the threats that we face are actually going to require a strong, innovative science and technology approach. No doubt our emergency operations and so forth are part of it as well, but we have a lot of unknown threats, and it will require the scientific engine of this country to address these threats. And so the budget cuts to research and development, S&T, does not send a good signal to the community that I come from.
Okay. Chief Rice?
I agree with everything my colleague said. I have no further comment at this time.
Okay. Well, I see that my time has expired, so I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from New Jersey, Ms. Watson Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. I want to follow up, I guess, on both what the chairman and the ranking member were talking about, but perhaps from a different perspective. And this has to do with the Trump administration's fiscal year 2018 budget cuts. I know some of those cuts have been restored through an appropriations process, but we still are grappling with some serious underfunding. You all have been asked by the chairman on the first sense, what is it that you think, what is it you'd like for us to do? What is it you think that the agencies should do? What would be the priorities? I would like to know from your perspective, based upon some of the things that you said, agility, innovation, identifying the brightest and the best, working with private sector, et cetera. Tell me from your perspectives, each of you, if you don't mind, what this budget does specifically to accomplishing those things that you said were vitally important from an operations perspective. I'll start with you, Chief.
Specifically what the S&T Directorate does for us from an operations perspective, or was it a budgetary question?
What is, how does this budget impact those things that you're interested in this directorate, and are responding to the chairman having said, what would you think we need to do? And then you indicated some issues with regard to agility and innovation and, to be able to move and respond to different threats. So I want to know, with the cuts that are proposed, or this budget that is proposed, what specifically impact would it have on where you think this directorate should be going?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. I think, as my colleague mentioned, the emerging technology is going at such a rapid pace, as is the evolving threats, and that cuts to this program and cuts to S&T will hamper our ability to keep up with those technologies and those threats. And as our equipment comes to reach its life expectancy, and as further threats evolve, we will start to lose pace with those and not be on the cutting edge of preparedness and response.
Thank you. Dr. Parker?
Yes, let me mention something that hasn't been mentioned yet in regards to the cuts. There's also a proposed cut to the University Centers of Excellence effort. And so what will that mean? I don't know, but is that possibilities are decreased numbers of centers of excellence, decreased funding to that, so there's decreased university input as being part of the solution for Homeland Security. I think it has another effect, and that's affecting the next generation. I know one of the things we do at Texas A&M is really focus on, and we have been able to leverage having a center of excellence to make sure that we give opportunities to students and student interns, graduate students, and so they get exposed to Homeland Security issues and maybe take a career in Homeland Security. So I think this is also going to have an effect on the next generation and diminish the number of people who take a career path in this area. As I said in my opening statement, and thankfully some of the budget's been restored to save closure of the MBAC. But I can't imagine if that were closed, what our ability to be able to bring to bear microbial forensics and attribution for a potential biological attack, or trying to differentiate a natural from a biological attack. That could be catastrophic.
Thank you. Mr. Parker?
So I know, much of what was proposed in the budget has been restored through the appropriations process, as my colleagues mentioned, but you know, as proposed, as Dr. Brothers mentioned, the budget would have cut Chem Bio by 60%, cybersecurity by 40%. I think that, I guess, the impact of that could be that you would slow the development of some really important technologies. I was just talking recently with one of our member companies who was working on a project funded through the Chem Bio portion about that would basically now enable smart buildings to detect chem and bio threats on an affordable basis. And something our industry is working on, you know, generally is building security. And that would be, you know, a great addition there that could, especially in urban areas, that could be important. Also, on the cybersecurity front, there's a company that's involved in application security and mobile devices at a very high level. It's something that they could possibly be affected by. So,
Thank you. Dr. Brothers.
So I think I can be general and then get to some specifics. Mr. Parker just mentioned specific budget cuts to both cyber, well, to cyber and the bio division. So in the bio division, they're interested in expanding the work they're doing in New York City to not just look in the subways, but also to look at setting up a test bed for biosecurity. The challenge is, how do you do this when your budget's being significantly cut? Right? How do you do that? Starting kind of a new initiative. How do you do that? It's a challenge. The cybersecurity division, I mentioned how they're reaching out to industry, financial, automotive sectors, energy sectors. Again, this all takes funding. And they're doing this to increase the cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure. They're also reaching out to industry, this in Silicon Valley, Austin's, Boston's, DC, et cetera, to reach out to the creative communities around the world. Again, need the funding for that. I think that there's a number of challenges with, actually I want to go back to what Dr. Parker said about the centers of excellence. Let me give an example if I can. I was at USC, and actually before that I was at LAPD. And they've instituted something they call predictive policing. In predictive policing, they were using technology to actually reduce crime by 14% in certain areas. I then went to USC, which is one of DHS's centers of excellence. What they showed was that using game theoretic techniques, they were able to improve that to almost 25%. So the importance of university research shouldn't be understated at all. It's part of the SNT ecosystem, the laboratories, universities, government, industry, et cetera. And so I think these budget cuts impact that entire ecosystem. But in specific ways, you can look at programs that DHS has, SNT has instituted, and they get impacted directly.
Thank you. Thank you. I see my time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for your testimony this morning. I thank my colleague, Mrs. Watts-Coleman, for addressing a lot of the things that I have in my questions. I'm going to give you an opportunity to elaborate on some of those topics, both Chem Bio in particular and cyber. Dr. Parker, I'd like to just start with you, if I could. As you mentioned in your testimony, the President's budget request for FY 2018 ends DHS's S&T funding for the state-of-the-art, one-of-a-kind biocontainment laboratory, the National Biological Analysis and Countermeasures Center, the NBAC facility at Fort Detrick, Maryland, and without transferring the responsibility for operating the facility to a different department or agency. So can you elaborate on the impacts on national security and law enforcement if this facility were to close?
Yes, thank you for the question. The MBAC, and then specifically, actually both missions of the MBAC, the threat assessment and the bioforensics mission, was, actually I had something to do with the original vision back when I was at the United States Army Medical Research and Material Command, and then subsequently in DHS S&T. And it was a strong collaboration between the FBI, law enforcement, the intelligence community, defense, and then it was the Office of Homeland Security before it became the Department of Homeland Security. And so this laboratory facility has had a lot of thought that went into why it was needed, what capabilities it required to support what was a new science that was born out of the anthrax letter attacks, and that was microbial forensics. And so it really is a very key mission in trying to determine who may be responsible for a biological attack, whether it's an individual, whether it's a terrorist, whether it's a nation state. Those are no regret decisions as well. And so the science and everything associated with what's needed for a law enforcement investigation has got to be beyond reproach. So there was a lot of thought that went into this. And I certainly would not want to be in the National Command Authority and we had to make decisions about retaliation, say for a nation state bioattack. That's not out of the realm of possibility today, unless I knew that science behind the microbial forensics was solid. It's a no regret decision. That's the impact that we have with that laboratory potentially closing.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer, and I agree. Hopefully that's going to be something that would be reversed as we go through the budget process and get through the appropriations process. That's something that I hope is going to reverse itself. So that's certainly something that I will advocate for. Dr. Brothers, if I could, thank you for being here. It's good to see you again before the panel. Always appreciate your candor and your testimony. I just want to thank you for all your work securing the Homeland and all the things you have done to improve DHS. So DHS specifically, the Science and Technology Directorate, has funded important cybersecurity research to protect the Homeland. I know you had this conversation just a minute ago. For instance, though, SNT grants have played an important role in catalyzing research to catalog free and open source projects that represent the core internet infrastructure. Obviously, it's vital to understand which libraries are integral to critical infrastructure in order to ensure that they're adequately secured, and which is why the SNT support really has been so important. So needless to say, this research is just one example of many that the Directorate supports in this emerging security domain. And you know, just to further elaborate on the cybersecurity front, based on your experience, how would cutting the cybersecurity research budget as proposed by the Trump administration affect the ability of DHS to secure the Homeland?
So I think one of the challenges that we run into in the panel, we've said this a couple of times, there's emerging threats coming out. And one of the things that DHS, SNT, the cybersecurity division as well, is try to think ahead, right? Think ahead. So here's an example. Autonomous vehicles that I mentioned a little bit earlier. A number of years ago, the cybersecurity division started working with industry to think about what are going to be some of the challenges securing not just autonomous vehicles, but network vehicles. So there's a lot of conversations about smart transportation, right? This is where you've got cars that are communicating with infrastructure to improve the transportation experience, if you will, right? The challenge is, what if you hack into that? And one of the things that cybersecurity division did was to start thinking about that early on and develop a consortium of automotive makers to try to address some of those issues. The same is true getting the oil and gas companies together in a program called Logic to think through what are some of the threats to the infrastructure. So the challenge you run into is that when you look at infrastructure that's privately owned, there's not necessarily the motivation to start thinking ahead for these kinds of things. But the motivation is there for the cybersecurity division and the rest of S&T. You start thinking about 20% budget cuts to the cybersecurity division, those are the kinds of things that get impacted. It's the ability to look ahead, the ability to invest monies to understand what potential problems there will be with emergent technologies, and develop mitigating solutions.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have one brief last question. Would that be all right? So, Dr. Brothers, one last question. So cybersecurity obviously is an international issue by its nature. How essential to securing our federal networks and critical infrastructure is cooperative research and development with our international allies? And what are some of the examples of successful projects that S&T has supported in that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things that we have to realize is that because of the hyper-connected nature that we live in, technology, These kind of engineering and scientific expertise is really democratized. Everyone has this. And so we don't necessarily have the only best ideas. It's important that we reach out to all the people, our friends, our allies, to try to understand what some of the best ideas are out there. We have relationships, we have 13 bilateral relationships across the world, and we leverage all of those in cyber as well as in some of the other areas as well to try to get some of the best advantages. We've actually started the idea of having, with the Netherlands, with having a joint BAs, broad area announcements, meaning that we're now working with the Netherlands to put out solicitations to the international community. So it's that kind of joint work that DHS is doing, DHS SNT is doing, to leverage the entire global ecosystem of creative thinkers.
Dr. Brothers, thank you very much. Thank you all for the witnesses for their testimony. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for the latitude in being able to ask that last question.
Absolutely. We have such an advantage of having the four of you here. I just asked the ranking chairman. I think we're going to just let each member have 2 more minutes with you just because we have you here. And my one question to all of you, because your testimony was incredible, your efforts to protect our nation, we are so grateful for. As you're doing this research, Doctor, as you were speaking about reaching out to our allies, how do we protect what we discover? Everything we create, the bad guys try to intrude on. So without divulging trade secrets or national security issues, and I promise my colleagues we're only going to get 2 minutes each because we have to let you go. I know the chief has to get to another part of our nation right now. The challenge I see, besides creating these great things you're speaking of, is how do we keep them to us? If you just have a thought about that, and then I'm going to pass the questions on to my colleagues.
Yeah, I'll start. You know, it's an excellent question. I'm not sure if I have the best answer, but it's a must that we protect our science and secure our science. I would actually maybe recommend that you talk to a very good colleague and friend of mine from the FBI, Special Agent Ed Wu, who has thought about this topic a lot. And he used to think about it just in the terms of biosecurity, but it's really emerged into how do we, it's protecting our science, how do we do it securely? And perhaps maybe universities have the biggest challenge, but it's an area that I know that Texas A&M takes very, very seriously.
I suspect you have to report on your research if you're using federal monies for it, and how do we protect your research. Doctor, how do we protect this stuff?
It's hard. It's hard. We all know about cyber intrusions, that kind of thing. I think there are a number of people, including S&T, looking at different architectures for cyber defense. There are people looking at different ways of encrypting information, whether that information is in storage, transit, or in computation. That can help. But I think you also have to consider their different paradigms, because of democratization of all this knowledge, you can't keep everything secret. So the question is, how do you continue to innovate even more rapidly? Because part of it's going to be not just keeping things secret, but it's going to be outpacing the innovation of our adversaries and never stopping. And that's what requires the agility and adaptability we were talking about earlier.
Thank you, Doctor. I already violated my 2-minute rule. The chair recognizes the ranking member from New Jersey, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Brothers, during your term as Undersecretary of Science Technology, you took a number of steps, like reinstituting the integrated product teams to create formal channels of R&D coordination among DHS components. Can you elaborate on some of the obstacles the Directorate faces when it comes to streamlining and coordinating R&D throughout the department?
Sure. One of the challenges just is a large organization, large bureaucracy, right? So you have a lot of different stakeholders. So the IPT, again, the Secretary signs that out. That's excellent because that gives some top-level mandate to that. But then you have other processes. You've got the Joint Requirements Council as a process. It has to be approved through the DMAG, these kinds of things. So a lot of it is messaging and socialization. And I think those are, it's all on culture, right? I mean, a lot of these big organizations, they struggle because of culture. And you look at an organization like DHS that has multiple cultures because of the way it was created. How do you create a joint culture that understands what SNT is doing in the larger context as well in the context that each individual component has. I think that is one of the biggest problems. It's not so much the IPT process or convincing people it's a good idea. It's how do they accept it? And how do you message to them how this is a good thing for them as well? It's a work in progress.
Thank you. Well, and Mr. Chairman, I have more of a statement than another question. I think as we have gone through this process, we see how important S&T is in with the evolving threats that we have in this area and with the world. I think it's incumbent upon us to continue to have the administration, whichever administration it is, understand how important this is, because when we are attacked, and God forbid when we are, we're always sorry and remorseful after it. But if we can do the things we need to do to thwart it, then we wouldn't find ourselves in that position. We have to get the administration, regardless of whatever administration it is, to take this seriously and put in place a budget that is consistent and would allow S&T to do the work and the type of things that it needs to do to make sure that we're successful in this area. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields, and I hope that your testimony didn't scare my colleagues who left to go protect themselves somewhere in a bunker. I want to thank our witnesses, first of all, for your valuable testimony, secondly, for your contributions to the safety of our nation. And I'd like to also thank my colleagues for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you all.